Welcome to the latest edition of the Shukri Wrights podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights. Today, I am very happy and honored to be joined by a very, very well familiar play-by-play broadcaster in Major League Baseball. He's the current radio and television play-by-play announcer for the world champion Los Angeles Dodgers. Tim Neverett joins the podcast today. How are you doing, Mr. Neverett?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited to have you on. First things first, let's talk about the Dodgers, where they currently are as we head into the All-Star break and expectations for them in the second half of the season.
Where they currently are is not where they wanted to be. They're 2 games behind the Giants in the National League Western Division standings. They've had their share of ups and downs. They've had their share of injuries, and injuries aren't an excuse in baseball. You have to deal with them. And this year, for some reason, all around baseball, there's been a ton of injuries on every club. There have been some key ones with the Dodgers. They're missing some pitchers right now. Clayton Kershaw went on the IL just before the All-Star break. He's expected back sometime right after. Bullpen, we've got a lot of our AAA guys in the bullpen right now because we've got bullpen injuries. But still, they took 2 of 3 from Arizona over the weekend, and they're, I think, pretty satisfied to be where they are at this point in time, knowing how much time is left in the regular season and a lot of head-to-head games with the Giants coming up. So I think the expectation for the second half is that they need to clean up some things defensively. I think they haven't been too happy with the way things have gone in games and in terms of some of the detail work they've got to clean up. And I think once the pitching gets back on track and everybody's healthy again, they're going to be a very tough team to beat. And they figure they're going to be right there for the division title, playing for that again. And they're looking forward to another postseason.
How surprised are you by the San Francisco Giants? Me personally, I am shocked that by all metrics and considering all things that they have the best record in the National League and have had the best record in the National League for most of the season. Like, how surprised are you to see the Giants getting off to the start that they've gotten off to? I'm
pretty surprised. I'm fairly surprised. And I think there's a lot of people around baseball waiting for the other shoe to drop with the Giants, but just hasn't dropped. It just hasn't happened yet. But you got to give credit to Farhan Zahidi for what he's been able to do since he came over from the Dodgers and took over as the president of baseball ops with San Francisco. He's taken a chance on some players that maybe other ball clubs wouldn't have. He sees something in them. Like a Kevin Gausman, for instance. Saw him a lot when he was with the Baltimore Orioles and the Atlanta Braves. And, he was a good pitcher, but he wasn't doing things like he's doing now. He's got an elite splitter that he's developed since he's been with the Giants. Johnny Cueto's a good pitcher, and he's become better this year. Alex Wood's having a career year. So that's what it's taken, a resurgence of Brandon Crawford, who was really not very good last year. And he was okay the year before. This year, he's having a great year. So everybody seems to be having a good year on that ball club at the same time.
Yeah.
So that is the formula normally for a team that is a so-called surprise to be doing what they're doing. And I think the Giants are going to hang in there. And I think there's going to be a 3-team race between the Giants, Dodgers, and Padres in the NL West. It's going to be pretty exciting for baseball.
I wholeheartedly agree, especially anytime you have a division race that involves the Giants and the Dodgers. It's one of the leading headlines in baseball. The last time that I can remember where the Giants and Dodgers were neck and neck for the division was 2004, and I'm sure Dodger fans remember Steve Finley's name quite well and how they captured the division that year. Now, looking ahead to the second half, if the Dodgers are going to turn it around, and by all accounts, it looks to me that this is a team that entered 2021 with a lot of expectation and expecting to defend their World Series title. But they, as you mentioned, they got up to the slow start. They've had injuries. And one most notable name, Mookie Betts. By all accounts, I watched him for years here in Boston. He hasn't looked like himself in the first half. How important is it going to be for Mookie Betts to turn his season around and get going in the second half for the Dodgers to have a chance for the division?
Yeah, hugely important, and I'm with you. I was with him in Boston for 3 years, so I know what he can do, and the back of his baseball card doesn't lie. So he's a guy that the Dodgers definitely need. Now, he's decided to take the All-Star break to himself and not participate in the All-Star game because he's had some things that have been bothering him, the left shoulder and lower back that have not been quite 100%, and he doesn't use that as an excuse. He's a guy who just the other day assessed his own performance as bad. He goes, I can't be bad anymore. And so the last 3 games before the All-Star break, he had 2 hits. Yesterday, 3 hits. He's had a grand slam and a leadoff home run. So we're seeing the real Mookie Betts. He's standing up now. And I think in the second half, he's the guy that's going to do it. When you look at Mookie Betts' career batting average in September and October, when it really counts, he's a 324 hitter lifetime. So he's trying to get back to that. And I think he's, at least a step, maybe 2 steps closer to doing that. And what I saw over the last week from Mookie is more of the Mookie that I was accustomed to seeing in Boston, that we saw last year when he came to the Dodgers. And I think what we'll see a lot more of in the second half. And he really is a key player for them offensively.
As you mentioned, you were in Boston for 3 years, and I had the joy and the privilege of listening to you and Joe Castiglione on WEI on a nightly basis. And to be frank, I'm big fan of yours.
Thank you.
You had a front seat to 2018 and what is deemed as the greatest Red Sox team of all time, and rightly so. Last year in 2020, although it was a COVID truncated season in Major League Baseball, you saw the Dodgers have the best record in baseball, go on a roll through the playoffs, coming back from 3-1 down against Atlanta to go on to win the World Series. Are there any similarities or contrast between the 2018 Red Sox that you saw in the 2020 Dodgers in terms of how they both dominated their respective leagues, and as well as how they got to the point in winning the World Series?
Well, the common denominators were Mookie Betts and Joe Kelly. David Price, but Price opted out in 2020, so he didn't participate with the Dodgers. But those were the common denominators. And I think that the commonalities were the fact that when the Dodgers got up, they weren't going to lose. And the same thing with the Red Sox. The bullpen would shut things down. They also, if they were behind, you never were out of a game. The Red Sox in 18 were never out of a game. In just watching them every day, you're thinking, not when are they going to do it, but how are they going to do it? And oftentimes they did it. And the same thing with the Dodgers. They would, in fact, the Dodgers, I think, got out to a lot of big leads. The schedule was just so different. The season was so different because they only played teams on the Western half of things. They played the American League West and the National League West. They didn't play everybody. But I do agree with you that in 2018, that probably was the best Red Sox team of all time. In fact, I got a call before I went to my first Dodger spring training that following spring from one of the higher ups with the Red Sox, who said, we want to wish you the best of luck with the Dodgers, and just know that you will always be part of the greatest Red Sox team ever. And I took that to heart, and I thought that was a nice phone call for that person to make. And but he wasn't lying. I mean, they were. It was great every night. And when we went through the playoffs, I think once they clinched it in New York, when they beat the Yankees in the division series, I said, there's no way they're going to lose to Houston this year. They're just not going to, and they didn't. And when they got to LA, they were just better in most aspects of the game. And then the Dodgers won only one game, and it took 7 hours and 20 minutes to win that game on a walk-off home run in the 18th inning. So, but the Dodgers were a good team. They were the best team in the National League without question in 18, but the Red Sox were by far the best team in baseball.
I want to go back to 2020, because 2020 in so many aspects was such a challenging year. And you have a fantastic book coming out called COVID Curveball. It's coming out August 31st, and I'm looking forward to giving it a read. And even just based on the foreword written by Dodger legend Orel Hershiser, I'm really interested in hearing and reading about the stories about what it took on a daily basis just to have a major league season in 2020. What are some of your recollections on just some of the difficulties on a day-to-day basis, whether it be as a broadcaster and even observing like the players go through the routines just to prepare for a game during the 2020 COVID season?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it because there were so many protocols, the basic protocols that had to be followed. And you also had to make sacrifices in your life, right? You couldn't just go out to eat. You couldn't go places. I mean, just for me personally, and I think a lot of the players were the same way. the fact that it was basically ballpark, home, grocery store.
Wow.
And that was probably it. I know for me, that was it. And you couldn't really go anywhere or do anything because they didn't want you around people. So when you went to the ballpark, you had to be socially distanced. You always had to wear a mask. They took us out of the radio booth and put us in a luxury suite. And that sounds really nice and good, but they only did it because the luxury suites are much bigger and we were able to spread out. I mean, I was in the front row of a luxury suite where my partner was 3 rows behind me at a bar table. And our producer was set like 8 to 10 feet back inside the suite. He never saw, a game in person because he had to be way inside all the time. So we had to spread out. And that's just from our standpoint. The TV booth, we stayed in the TV booth. And when I would do TV games with Oral, I'm pretty sure we were at least 5 feet, 11 and a half inches apart from each other. It was pretty tight quarters as far as social distancing was concerned. Yeah. It might have been 5'11", 6 feet, somewhere in there. But it was just different. All of a sudden there's, stadium workers that were coming around. They were with gloves and with masks, and they would hand you packages of sanitized wipes every day for your own use. And there were soap dispensers, hand cleanser dispensers all over the place now at the ballpark. We had to get tested. We had to come in the morning. You go to a certain parking lot. You would administer a self-test after they instructed you on how to do it, drop your results in a bucket, and then wait for the results, and then you could go to work. So there was a lot of things that went on that were totally different from a regular season, and some still continue even today, which I hope don't for much longer. For instance, the broadcasters not traveling and just not having access to the players, to the manager, to coaches. I mean, I'm actually just now able to go down on the field, excuse me, and have brief conversations, but you have to hope the players walk by you. You can't just walk up to them. There's a certain protocol you still have to follow. So it hasn't recovered completely, although it may look like it. Stadiums are full. We're not traveling with the team. We're calling games off TV screens when they're on the road. In fact, on Thursday afternoon, I was doing radio for our game with the Miami Marlins, and our television screens went out 4 or 5 times during the game. We have nothing but black screens. So it's like calling a game blind and until they came back on. And we didn't know when they were coming back on. Fortunately, they weren't out for long, but it's just one of the hazards we're dealing with now as a hangover from the COVID season.
Why do you think major league teams are not allowing broadcasters to travel with the clubs to call road games? And as I intently listened to you explain the difficulties of calling road games remotely, I mean, although the vaccines are available and in other aspects,
yeah.
Why do you think that teams are hesitant to allow broadcasters to travel with the team on the road?
That's a really good question, and one I don't have an answer to.
And that's okay.
I get asked, I'm telling you, I get asked every day, sometimes multiple times a day, when are you going back on the road? Because to some people, it's obvious that we're not there. Yeah. And it is. For us, it's much harder to do. It's not fair to the audience where we cannot do our jobs 100%. We can't get the information we normally would. We can't see the game the way that we would. We have to rely on some director in another city. That's not anybody we work with. And what happens if the TV monitors go out? In spring training, I was warned ahead of one of our spring training games because we weren't there either. We had to do it from a studio in El Segundo, that we're having heavy windstorms today and it might knock out power. So be prepared in case you don't have any video from this game. So I was going to go off of the MLB ballpark app and recreate it based on the play-by-play that was coming up on the computer.
Wow.
That's all. I mean, that's what we're faced with. We're basically walking a tightrope without a net. And that's the situation that the teams have put their broadcasters in. There are many, many, many factors. It's not that they're like, hey, we're saving $1, which they are. But at the same time, there's a lot of things in terms of logistics for television, which people aren't considering. And there's a lot of those. There's a lot of, factors, perhaps legally. There's factors with the players union because we'd have to travel on the team plane And from what I understand, there are some teams that don't want anybody else but the players and coaches on the plane. So there's a lot of little things that we don't know about yet. And I know the Dodgers have told us nothing about us traveling. So I'm basically anticipating not traveling at all this year until they tell me otherwise.
I mean, even if the Dodgers were to get to the World Series or like NLCS in the World Series, I'm shocked. I'm genuinely shocked because we know just last year, like watching the Dodgers in the World Series, that you only had the TV crew with Joe Buck and John Smoltz on site at the bubble in Arlington, but to not have broadcasters there to call the game this fall, if it gets to that, would be shocking.
Well, last fall, and I chronicle in the book, is that during the playoffs and World Series, I was told one day that I was going, and then told the next day that they were shrinking the crew so much that I'm not going anymore.
Wow.
And so we had Rick Monday, a radio analyst, calling these postseason games that were taking place in Arlington, Texas. He's at Dodger Stadium. And Charlie Steiner, who was doing play-by-play on the radio for the postseason, was at his house. They weren't even in the same place.
Wow.
And the games were in another state. So, and there were things that went on, if you knew what you were listening for, that you're like, oh man, but they did the best they could, and everybody has been doing the best they can. There are people who say, oh, I don't know the difference. And I'm like, well, you're not paying attention, because if you were paying attention, you would definitely notice the difference.
Absolutely. For all viewers and listeners of this podcast episode, what are some of the things that you highlight in the book that you are most excited to get the reactions of the readers of the new book, COVID Curveball, which is coming out on August 31st?
First of all, I finally saw my first hardcover. I was given it last night.
So it looks beautiful. Oh my
gosh.
It
is. I'm going to see a bunch more later today, but it's got the celebratory picture on the back, and Mookie Betts, the team photo. And it's, the author photo is this one. I don't know if you can see it.
I can see, and for those who will be listening to this later on, it's Mr. Neverett himself standing next to the Commissioner Trophy at Dodger Stadium in center field.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stories. There's some stories that are a lot of baseball stories in it. It's not just for Dodger fans, but it does chronicle the day-to-day of the Dodgers' run to the World Championship through a big speed bump, which was COVID-19, and what other teams had to deal with, what Major League Baseball had to deal with, what we had to deal with as broadcasters, how different things were. There are pictures in there that show you what the back of the cardboard cutouts look like, which no one ever saw. I mean, just little things like that were really big things. But there's a lot of personal stories in there surrounding baseball. There's a story in there about Mookie Betts and the littlest tiny thing he did for me that was a big thing for my family when we were in Boston together. After something happened in my family, and Mookie just, like he would normally do, he didn't even think twice about it, and it was really good. So there's a story about that, and there's a story about Alex Cora and something he did for me that no one knows about. There's stories about when the Houston Astros came to town, even with no fans in the stands, how much security was needed. Wow. And they come to town in a couple of weeks. That's going to be crazy with 50,000 plus in the stands. There's a lot of stories about the day-to-day chronicles of the games themselves, the good, the bad, the crazy, and just stuff that's going on in the world. The social unrest that we had, the protests of the summer, where the players decided to not play. That started in the NBA, the WNBA, went through Major League Baseball. That took 2 days of not playing, and then the double headers that resulted afterward. And so a lot of different things that went on in 2020 that had something to do with the world of baseball, and seeing it through somebody who was with the team that eventually went on and won the title in spite of all these challenges.
You talk about 2020 in regards to the challenges and just some of the quirkiness that took place during the season. How strange was it for you to see cardboard cutouts of fans replacing actual fans at the ballpark?
Well, they came early and stayed late. They never left. Sometimes they were a little flat, but they were there. Actually, there was a positive to it, because if you're in the field and on television, at times it gave you the look of what it was. But what it really was most teams used it for their charitable arms, their foundations, where people could spend 10 to 50 to 100 to $200 or whatever the dollar figure was, depending. Like if you wanted to sit behind home plate, it was going to be, more expensive to get your cardboard cutout because you're going to be on TV all the time. So, but it raised money. I know the Dodgers raised a lot of money for the Dodgers Foundation, and other teams did the same thing. So if you're looking for a positive out of it, that was it. The piped in crowd noise, most ball clubs use the soundtrack from MLB The Show, the video game. We didn't. We used, I think, a combination of things, including having a Grammy award-winning audio producer produce our tracks and had custom "Let's Go Dodgers" chants in there and things like that. So it was pretty good. It was actually really good. Sometimes you could actually close your eyes with your headphones on, you're calling the game. If you had a breath, you could close your eyes and like picture the stadium full because it sounded like it on the radio. So on the radio, it sounded more normal than anything else. On TV, you could see the empty sections of stands at times and the cardboard cutouts, and there were just things you couldn't hide on television. But on radio, we tried to make it sound as normal as we could. And in some cases we fooled them and others we didn't. But it was different. The cutouts had their pluses and minuses, but I think all in all, under the circumstances, they were positive.
Last question I want to ask you. What can fans expect of the new book? And as well as, what are some of your recollections of the journey for you that it took for you to write this new book?
Well, it was something I thought about writing during the quarantine after the first spring training. And when I decided to do it, because I didn't know if we'd have 60 games, 100 games, no games. I didn't know. So I decided to go back and recount what happened during spring training and the day of the shutdown. Because I was actually in Las Vegas. I left spring training in Arizona, drove up to Vegas for the Pac-12 basketball tournament, and I was going to drive back because I had a couple of days off. And that's when it all went haywire. Everything stuck. The NBA shut down. The NHL followed. We followed after that. So during the quarantine, I decided to catch up on spring training. But after that, I wrote in real time every day. So after a game, I'd go back and I'd write what I saw, what happened that day. Sometimes during the day, I'd clean up what was happening from the night before. But it was basically written in real time on a day-by-day basis, so that about a week after the World Series, the manuscript was complete. So we had it all done. But there were times where I'm like, I'm just writing this. I don't know if anybody's ever going to read it, if it'll even see the light of day. If we don't win the World Series, is anybody going to care? And then when we're down 3-1 to the Braves in the National League Championship Series, I'm thinking, wow, there goes the book. But then we came back and won, and I said, oh, you know what? I think we're going to be all right. So it just worked out where from that time in quarantine, before we started to regroup in what we call summer camp and then the season, I decided to do this, and the Dodgers ended up going through and they won the world title. And, game 6 of the World Series happened. And if it had gone to a game 7, I don't know that we would have even had a game 7 because of Justin Turner's positive test during game 6. So that was kind of what I thought about. And once we got into the publishing process, I said, hey, this is real. And then I got this book in my hand, and now I know it's real, and going to book signings this week at the All-Star game. And, fans have been able to go to Amazon and pre-order it. So they don't run out of printed copies. So people trying to get ahead of the pre-order, it's available on Kindle version, and we'll have an audiobook version too. So it's available for pre-order. It'll be out August 31st for sale in all the bookstores. And, where I am in Denver at the All-Star game right now, they actually have these hardcovers at 2 locations where people can actually buy them now. I've been told that people have already been buying them. And I'm going to go do book signings today at 2 different locations. But it's been a whole new process for me because I've always been on the broadcasting side of things for the most part. I did write a newspaper column at one time, weekly. But this is really the first endeavor into writing anything, like a book. And I've learned a lot about the process, and it's pretty intriguing. But the bottom line is I think that any baseball fan is going to enjoy the book and be, I think, kind of interested in how this season had to play out and what people had to do to put it on. People would turn on the radio or turn on the TV to watch a game to escape from COVID-19 and escape from the news of the day. But what went into putting those things on so that people could have that escape and get back to some semblance, at least a shred of reality from what we were used to before? There was a lot that went into it, and I think people would be surprised at how much.
I can't wait to give it a read myself. I'm excited. I'm being a baseball nut job that I am. I'm very much interested in hearing your story and everything that went into the 2020 World Championship season for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Radio and television play-by-play announcer Tim Neverett, thank you immensely so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. I cannot wait for August 31st to be able to get the book and read it, and hope to have you back on the podcast to talk about the book itself.
Well, thanks. And any of your listeners or viewers, if you want to just get a description of it, just, search it on Amazon at COVID Curveball, and it's got a great description of it there. And it'll give you more idea of what the book's about. And I think that any baseball fan, any sports fan, really, as far as we know, this is the only book like this. So I'm anxious to see what people think of it.
Absolutely. I can't wait to share with you my thoughts as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Never, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.